I'm going to keep clapping for John Gray. He's on here. Thank you for joining us. I'm Mia Voss. You're just tuning in to the Mia Connect Power Chat. We have a very special day, time, and guest, so thank you for being here. We're usually on Fridays, but I got to get some time with John Gray, so I'll do whatever he wants just to talk with him. So welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure for me to be here, Mia.
Thank you. I'm going to make this noise for you, too.
Because you can.
Because I can. Don't you wish you had that every time you walked in somewhere? I feel like you have that anyway. People get so excited. So listen, Google, you need to behave today so that this hangout goes well, because we all want to hear what John has to say. So I may cut in and out, but he won't, and it's going to be great. But my tiara is working. Did you notice that, John?
I did notice the tiara.
I'm just trying to compete with that dapper hat you have going on. Well, listen, some of you know I went to the Success Summit in Boulder about 2 weeks ago. I ran into John. I kind of accosted you. I don't know if you remember that.
I don't remember being accosted, but I remember meeting you.
Okay, good. I feel good because I was a little worried that I just kind of came at you, and you were so gracious and spent a lot of time talking with me. We were dealing with through natural cures, which is fantastic. And then, of course, I started reading your book and wanted to bring you on. But let's talk about you. It's so great to see you, though.
Well, I'm really happy to spend this time with you. Promoting the new book, Staying Focused in a Hyper World, has definitely challenged me to stay focused. So many opportunities, but that's what life is about. We're being hyper stimulated with opportunities and problems to solve and challenges and clients and everybody. How do we stay focused on what's most important? That's the key to it.
Yes, and that's the thing that really jumped out at me of this staying. And I've been doing a lot of research in the last couple of days. Hyper anything, right, is just not a good thing.
Well, that's the whole story about this book, which is whatever our normal challenges are, when we're overstimulated in our life, it's like putting a magnifying glass on top of our temperament, on top of our challenges, on top of our conditioning. So let's say you are feeling a bit introverted. Then when you're hyperstimulated in life, you become hyper-introverted. If you're a sensitive person, you become hypersensitive, which can cause mood swings, can cause happiness one day and being upset the next day, and it's like, where's the congruency? We tend to lose it. You can see this so clearly in children because they typically fall in the 4 categories. They could be defined in many different ways, but a simple way is some kids are more bold. They like to take risks. They're assertive. They often act without thinking sometimes. They're impulsive in their actions. Then you get kids who are more distracted. They're more they want to express themselves. They're creative types. They always like to start new things, but they don't have a good. Their challenge is to finish those things. So they're always starting things and then procrastinating, putting it off. So if you are hyperstimulated, if your brain is hyperstimulated, then you never finish things. You're starting and starting and starting. Then there's another type of child or adult who's more responsible. They're the more compliant kids. You know, they want to do everything right, but when they're hyperstimulated, like with video games, with the high carbohydrate diet, with rushing around, and as they get to become teenagers with porn and so forth, these responsible types, they are really hard on themselves, and they have this perfectionist thing where I have to be perfect. And one of the challenges there, is that quite often in their relationships, they demand perfection of their partner. It's kind of like, well, you should be this way, you should be that way, and people see them often as judgmental and critical, and they really go, but I'm not judgmental and critical. I'm just saying how things can be better. That's all I'm doing. It's just that their vision is this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is how we can make it better. So the 4th type is the more sensitive type, and they get their feelings hurt really easily because they're hyper-focused on what other people need. So let me be considerate of you. What would you like? Let me do this for you. And they're always like little antennas up going, what do other people need? How can I give them what they need? And when people don't think that way about them, it's like, doesn't anybody care about me? And they tend to be really challenged when it comes for asking for support because their whole thing is, I give and give and give. Why aren't people giving and giving to me? Now, even as we're talking about this, Mia, some people listening might go, well, I'm all of those things.
I was raising my hand of like, that's me, that's me.
Probably like that. But, you know, part of maturing is we integrate all aspects of who we are. As children, they'll tend to go through phases. One will be more dominant, another is more dominant. But hopefully we integrate all of these aspects of ourselves, which is we can be confident and bold, we can be sensitive to other people's feelings, we can be positive and uplifting and creative. How can I think outside the box here? And yet at the same time be grounded with that sense of responsibility and following through. That's a whole person. But what happens is we're having this overstimulation, which challenges us from integrating all these parts in a healthy way. When we see it in children, it's much more clear they're one way or another, and we want to medicate it, and we call it ADHD, or we call it ADD. And the same condition, as people get older in their 60s and 70s, it turns into dementia, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and that's what's going on in the world today. It's not just happening to our kids, it's happening to adults, and it's at an older age, but then in middle age, it challenges our relationships tremendously. It's very hard to stay committed in a relationship. Our attention span is shorter. Our ability to empathize becomes less because we're hyper-stimulated. We tend to seek more stimulation to feel happiness. So we're jumping from one thing to another, and yet we don't experience a depth. And this is what's happening today. So staying focused in a hyper world means to come back to what is most important and how are we putting our energies into that. You know, I remember once taking a class back in the day when time management was new, and one of the things they pointed out was is people tend to spend 80% of their time in business on the things that really don't matter that much and 20% of their time on things that matter the most. And I think we can apply that right now to all things in our life, is that in our relationships, for example, you know, when people think about what's most important, it's love and connection and compassion and generosity. And these are the things that really bring true happiness and fulfillment in life, give us a sense of making a difference. And that's what's most important. And yet we spend our time doing all kinds of things. And when it comes down to practical things, like as a counselor, couples will say to me, you know, my husband's not turned on to me anymore, or we're not having intimate time anymore. And I say, why? The first question, and they, well, we're too busy. And I go, do you watch TV at night? Yeah. So the reality is that we think we're too busy, but really we're overwhelmed and we're exhausted, and we have to come back to some sense of balance. And so this book is not just the psychological aspect of it, but it's also the physiological side of it. Because you can talk and talk and talk about balancing your life, but what's happening is our brains have literally changed, and we want to change our brains back. And there's physiological changes that occur. And it's most researched if you look at something like cocaine. If you take cocaine, which is a stimulant, and one dose, your brain is rewired so that all you seek for happiness is suddenly another shot of cocaine. But that same rewiring happens to a lesser degree if somebody watches a great TV show. Then your mind is always going like, you're feeling sort of restless, and you go to the TV like it's going to give that to you every time. Or maybe you get a good email, and it was good news. So now for the rest of your life, you're always going to the email whenever you're feeling kind of restless and unsettled. And what we have to learn to do is not to be so addicted to these things in our outer world. And they're a sign that we're not experiencing groundedness and centeredness inside ourselves.
And I'll tell you, especially with this audience that's watching, we're all online people, John. So think about that. I mean, that's what our world is. A lot of these people, this is where we make our money, is from having all these different screens open. And again, when I first heard you talk about that at the summit and then started reading the book, I thought, oh, man, I mean, there really are a lot of combinations. And I want to read this real quick because this is what I picked up from a description. And this is what I'm loving about all the work you're doing. Learn how new communication skills and nutrition can immediately lower stress levels while providing the foundation.
I couldn't hear that whole message, but got part of it.
It got part of it. It's basically that, you know, you are combining communication skills with nutrition, so you're really helping people to sort of start from the inside out, because if we have too much input, it's going to be hard to stay focused.
Well, let's take an example of being stimulated with screens and online. And, for me, a lot of my work is, writing in front of a computer even. It's such an immediate gratification. Digital input, lights, colors, changes, fast changes. What these things do is they stimulate the part of the brain called nucleus accumbens, which is a dopamine part of the brain. And dopamine gives us focus, it gives us pleasure, it gives us motivation, and it gives us interest. So we become interested. So we're looking for, I'm interested, I'm interested, I'm interested. So when we're being stimulated, that all feels good. But then you're just sitting around. Let's say you go out in your front yard, and if you have a yard, or you go sit in a park, it's boring, it's flat, it doesn't stimulate us. We don't look at the squirrels and go, oh my gosh, look at the squirrels. I just had my grandchildren, 3 grandchildren staying at our house this weekend, so last night. So these 2 little boys, they were like 6 years old, the little girl's 8, and it got dark, and one of the little boys ran upstairs and said, oh my gosh, wow, it's unbelievable, come look, and they're all like laughing, oh my gosh, what is it, and they were looking out over the balcony, over the twinkling lights in the valley outside my house. It was that they hadn't seen that view before. So that newness, this is why children have so much energy, is that life is all new and new and new. That's called stimulation. And what that does, if we do it too much, if we have overstimulation, then what's called the dopamine receptor sites in the brain, they start to close down. And then we depend upon hyperstimulation to feel alive, and then they close down even more. So a way of understanding this is like if I was to go out into the bright light, the pupils in my eyes would contract. And then I go into the darkness and they open up again. So the light is the stimulation. So we get overstimulated, these receptor sites contract, and they will stay contracted unless we take time to experience the opposite, which is the darkness. So we want to take time to be stimulated and then take time to relax and be more connected to nature. Lying in a chair in front of while the sun's shining on you, for example, or going swimming, being in natural environments, having dinner with friends as opposed to watching TV together, talking person to person. Nothing wrong with online talking. It's just that stimulates high levels of dopamine. When you're in person with people, it's less, and your brain gets adapted, comes back to balance when we have more personal interaction.
And so for those of you out here that John through Mars Venus, obviously he has been doing, and it's not even a new direction, John. This is something that you really started getting into, correct?
Well, this is an extension of my work. I'm still a marriage counselor. I still take classes on dating and relationships, although I'm happy to say my youngest daughter, who's 28, has sort of taken it on. So if you go to my website, she does every week. She's doing the videos, I do some of them, but she's like fully active, fully on. And she kind of takes the Mars-Venus point of view for a younger generation as well as from the female point of view. So we have these wonderful debates. It's quite wonderful to have your child completely respecting you, like I'm this authority, but then challenges me and questions me. And I've learned so much from it. So it's very exciting for me to see the work she's doing.
I love that new take on it, by the way. It's marsvenus.com, and it's John Gray and Lauren Gray side by side. You have the blog post. It is such a wonderful correlation.
Thank you. She's sort of nailed the last year and a half. I've been working with her every week editing a program she's coming out with in January called How to Get More Me Time, which is a huge challenge for women. It's for women only. Men go, I get plenty of me time. He has no problem taking me time. That's the difference between men and women, is when men are under stress, they tend to come back into me time. When women are under stress, they go into giving to others. And so it's hard to take that time for yourself to find balance. So she's developed this whole program with exercises and things for women to do that doesn't take a lot of time. Otherwise you couldn't do the course. So she leads you through it. It's quite wonderful. So while she's busy doing that, I've been focusing actually on the last 12 years. I set up a wellness clinic in Northern California at my ranch. And we had experts coming in from around the world teaching about natural solutions. And the reason I got into this was because 12 years ago, I was diagnosed with Parkinson's. And with a sister with Alzheimer's, and a brother with dementia, and another brother with bipolar. These are like in the brain. I was vulnerable to this. For me, there's many causes of this. For me, the cause was, as a child, lots of concussions to the brain. And when you get older, then it shows up as Parkinson's. The highest risk of Parkinson's is concussions to the brain. That's why we see now all the football players are having Parkinson's symptoms, or a lot of them, from the concussions that they had. And Western medicine has no solution for it. This is a sad thing. At least the popular Western medicine does. I quote in my book Dr. Hintz, who's proven that with natural supplements you can stop it and you can reverse it at different stages. Now for me, it was the early stages. But the big wake up for me was that when I cured the Parkinson's and stopped the shaking, my wife said, "You're a totally different guy." And what had happened was the condition that heals Parkinson's also heals ADHD type symptoms. So those hyper symptoms we were talking about before, all of that went away. And my wife was like, "This is amazing stuff." And she makes sure I take the supplements. She can even tell. Sometimes she'll hand me some of my mineral tablets if she finds I'm getting distracted. And we laugh and I take them, whatever. She also takes the supplements as well. They're just for everybody. When we're so busy and overwhelmed, our symptoms show up differently. But there's challenges that we're facing in a hyper world with a hyper stimulating diet.
Well, this is what I love about the work you did with Mars Venus. So again, it's helping to talk about the difference in the way that we communicate. Like you said, when the guy's not busy, you come home and he's on the couch hanging out, right?
Exactly. And if you try to have a conversation, even his mind wanders off. It's hard for men to stay focused on what's familiar. You see, after a few years in marriage, what your wife says, it's familiar. It's like the same song over and over. Now, if you play the same song on the radio over and over, you get bored. That means it no longer produces dopamine. Now, the good news is a human being really isn't the same song, because we change and we grow. But if we don't have enough dopamine, then it seems like, oh, I can't deal with anything which is familiar. I've got to just pull away and see, like, watch 10 shows at once on TV, or watch the news or a sporting event where you go, what's going to happen next? What's going to happen next? It's men want to go into that place of what's going to happen, as opposed to predictability.
Real quick, it looks like I want to give a shout out to the backpack need while women are motivated when they feel cherished. She's quoting you to you, by the way.
It's a very nice quote.
It is an excellent quote. And I want to get, again, to go back to Mars Venus. So that came out 22 years ago, right?
Yes.
And it's still fresh. And again, I love that you have Lauren now involved to take that younger perspective into it, of the information that's still fresh and new. I mean,
well, the interesting thing about Men Are From Mars,
we haven't changed.
Yeah, I mean the differences that I've talked about in Men Are From Mars were actually sort of biologically based. I didn't know that at the time. Now we have the research. In my later books, I've shown the research in the brain, which shows this is hardwiring in the brain. And the good news is that hardwiring, there's also brain plasticity, and we can adapt. But still, the length of your nose doesn't change. There's certain things that just don't change. For example, the limbic system in the brain, which handles emotions, a lot of the emotions are handled by the limbic system, it's twice as big in women. That doesn't change. Under moderate stress, women have 8 times more blood flow to the emotional part of the brain. Under big stress, men have more blood flow going to the emotional part of the brain, and women disassociate from their emotions. They become, in a sense, cold. So women get hot first, then cold. Men get cold first, then hot. I mean, this is phenomenal. So I would talk about these differences in Men Are From Mars that I observed since 1979, when I started looking at the differences. And then 10 years later, I wrote the book. And then 10 years later after that, there was all this research of the brain and the hormones that actually explains why those differences are there. But having said that, these are the differences that have evolved over millions of years. Now we've got our modern life is completely changed. Never has the outer world been so hyper. Never have there been so many opportunities, so much stress. Now the interesting thing is, somebody might say, well, hey, wait a second, people were always stressed. Let's say that you're back in the day and your village was surrounded by a moat, and there was an army on the outside of the moat, and they're camped out. Well, that's stress, but nothing like today's stress, because you know nothing is changing. See, the cortisol hormone gets produced when nothing changes over time. It's every time cortisol gets produced when you have quick changes over time. Every time you have to make a decision, this decision, that decision, that's what causes an accumulation of cortisol in the body, or at least one of the indicators of that. And so we have so many decisions to make. We're being stimulated all the time, and women, different from men, tend to have, on average, not every woman, but on average, women's cortisol levels are twice as high as a man's in the workplace, outside the home, and 4 times as high as a man's in the home. So this is like a big change in the last 20 years, because women's temperament experiences greater stress when making decisions, whereas men tend to experience less stress when making decisions. They can experience stress, but often men aren't aware or thinking of the consequences of others. You know, when Bonnie, my wife, thinks about something, what are we going to do this Christmas? You know, she's thinking about this family and that family and those kids and their parents and whatever. And I'm thinking about, well, what would I like to eat? It's a
have
lot
you ever
less
seen that?
stress.
Yes. Have you ever seen that cartoon where it says what a woman is thinking, and she's guessing what the man's thinking, and it's, you know, goes on and on about, oh, I think he's mad at me, and the guy's just thinking, what am I going to eat? Right?
That's exactly right. Or what's on TV tonight? Are they going to show this game? It's just we men tend to focus on one thing at a time, and women under stress will tend to take on too many things. When they're feeling not stressed, they still take on many things, it's not stressing them out. That's the nature of the complementary aspect of men and women. And it's not every man and women, but a lot of men and women experience this. And so what we have to recognize is once we're being overstressed, it is changing the brain. And coming back to, okay, I need to shift gears, consciously shift gears to restore balance. Now, what restores balance for women? Well, the hormone that lowers stress for women is oxytocin. Now, oxytocin actually lowers testosterone levels, both in women and men. But for men, testosterone is the hormone that lowers stress.
Right.
So testosterone, men tend to make 30 times more testosterone. They need 30 times more testosterone to function. So here's a man with healthy testosterone levels that keeps his stress down. For women, healthy oxytocin levels have been shown to keep her stress down. So what creates more oxytocin for women? Well, there's a lot of things. The general category of behaviors that stimulate oxytocin are anything that a woman does that she really enjoys doing, but she's not in a hurry. So if a woman feels that I like to do this thing and she's not in a hurry, oxytocin is being produced. Now, these are certain behaviors where she feels supported. So time, if she has lots of time, she feels supported by time. But there are lots of things that you can like to do that actually don't produce oxytocin because they're addictions. Like, for example, if you were to keep eating dessert, okay, for a while it's producing oxytocin for sure, but then it's having other negative side effects, and then you get addicted to that dessert. So it's tricky. So here's some things that have proven to create oxytocin in women. Hugs, massage, getting your nails clean, right, getting your hair done, having somebody else wash your hair produces a huge amount of oxytocin. Any type of affection from a man to a woman which is non-sexual. That's the irony of it. It's a non-sexual touch, increases oxytocin, and then, this is the paradox, then when oxytocin is higher, then women appreciate sexual touch and can respond to sexual touch. And men don't understand this. You know, they'll be on a hot date and you're touching her and she's all responsive. Then on another day, you do the same thing and she's not responsive at all. It's like, what happened? You know, I pushed the same button, it didn't work. It's her oxytocin levels have to build up. And so this is why, in a sense, the demand, the request for more romance from the side of women comes today in our modern world because romance is a major oxytocin producer. In my mother's generation, she didn't care that much about romance from my dad. They loved each other very much. What she cared is he had a good job and he was a gentleman at home. Those are the two big requirements. You have a good job and you're a gentleman at home. That was a great husband. But today, women need more than that. They actually do, because when women take on traditional male jobs, they're testosterone jobs. And when testosterone goes up, it's not producing oxytocin. Oxytocin and testosterone are like a seesaw. So when oxytocin goes up, testosterone goes down. So that's good for women. But when testosterone goes up, oxytocin goes down. That's not good for women. Now, does that mean it's bad for women? No. If women can be in a testosterone environment and anticipate, this afternoon I'm going to go shopping, or tonight or next week I'm going on a really great date with my husband to see this play, and I got this great guy that loves me, just anticipating that is going to be producing plenty of oxytocin while she's also producing testosterone. So this is the dance that we do. The challenge for men, and the men have another challenge, is that when men are solving problems and whatever, their testosterone levels can go really, really high, then they run out of testosterone. See, it's being produced and released while solving problems, fixing things, dealing with emergencies. When he comes home, he has to rebuild that testosterone. And the way men can rebuild testosterone is to stop solving problems. So if we don't understand our differences, she's going to talk about problems. He thinks, oh, these are more problems I have to solve.
Right. And it's just like this. I mean, you're talking at different levels. And guys, we do realize that there's some connection problems here. That's why I'm just letting the expert John tell us about that. And John, you're even talking about it from a level before we even get to when you discovered that you had ADHD, again, 12 years ago when you were coming out of Parkinson's. We're talking it almost like, and we've got two different things. One is when, the differences, and then if your brain's not healthy, right?
Well, the problem is if your brain is not getting the nutrient and the support it needs, then when the man runs out of his testosterone, it doesn't rebuild. When the woman's going shopping, she's not going to make enough estrogen relaxing in order for the oxytocin to work. So it's like female hormones work together, and if we don't have the right support in our diet and in our lifestyle, then the recovery period doesn't actually recover. For example, diabetes. We know that often diabetes is caused by too much carbohydrate, too much junk food, too much high blood sugar. Just going off of carbohydrates doesn't necessarily heal diabetes. It can reduce the symptoms of diabetes, but going off of sugar doesn't heal the cells. You literally need to take certain supplements with minerals to rebuild those cells. But if you don't have those minerals, your body doesn't respond and heal itself. We had talked about earlier that in the show we would talk about, in my book, there's these 14 different causes or 15 different causes of injury to the brain, and which then gives rise to hyperstimulation, it's the effect of hyperstimulation, and suddenly our receptor sites don't come back. And that's what Parkinson's is you downregulate the receptor sites, they begin to close down, and they don't bounce back. So, for example, some research has been shown if a child takes a stimulant drug like Ritalin or Adderall, usually within the first year, the dose has to be doubled. Now, why do you have to double the drug to get the effect you were getting before? Because it's literally changing the brain. And today, doctors will assure parents that there's no side effects of taking this drug, that's only good benefits. And these doctors aren't informed. There's only a few studies. I have 8 studies that have shown the damaging, injuring effects of these drugs, but certainly the companies that are selling the drugs don't tell you those things. That's not part of their sales presentation. Doctors don't read this research. How can they find it? It took me a hard time to find it all. There's over, 60 pages of references in the book that I had to go and find to back up these ideas, which intuitively make sense, but where's the research? And so one of the leading articles is from a Harvard researcher. You know, you say Harvard and people go, oh, it must be true. Well, the Harvard, and it's only like, I think 4 years ago, that they discovered that taking these stimulant drugs injures the brain. And they say damages the brain, but they're not looking at the natural solutions to heal this condition. That's not their forte. But they are pointing out this is not a casual decision, and it injures the brain, and it will affect the child later in life. And one of the symptoms of it affecting a child later in life is lack of motivation to start things, to move through things. And that's one of the things they've seen. I point out many of the other side effects that I see in people's lives, but you know, if you look at that thing they measure, which is lack of motivation to take initiative later in life, failure to launch is a more common phrase for it. Well, kids are not getting married. You know, that's another aspect of it. They just don't feel like I want to get married. And this used to be a common feeling. Many women are feeling, I don't want to deal with a man. I don't want to have children. I don't want to have a family. I just want to have my career. And that's how men feel. And if you measure their hormones, their testosterone levels are higher, and their female hormones are lower, and they'll have difficulty sleeping. They'll have more menopausal type symptoms at menopause. They'll have period problems with the whole period process. Their hormones are going to go out of balance if they're not consciously saying, hey, I have a career, but I also have a personal life which is very fulfilling, as opposed to my work is my fulfillment. That can seem that way, but that can be an addiction. We want to bring everybody back into a balance, whereas men have kind of a failure to make a commitment to a relationship. Women often lose interest in having a relationship. And so many women in college today are saying, I don't even care about having a relationship. I want my career. Now, that's their choice to do. I would, from my perspective, is let's look at the hormone balance. Let's look at some other symptoms they may be experiencing in their life. And they, not that everybody has to choose to have a marriage or children or whatever, but at least they should have the balance to decide if that's for them. And you have to like look at things like high blood sugar, stress levels, ability to sleep at night. And then you look at the huge amount of statistics of people who are dying of cancer and heart disease. Women now are higher than men when it comes to heart disease. And this is all, you know, it's heart. And so much of the research, if you're not personally fulfilled, or there's some crisis in your life, and there's a deep despair deep inside, that can cause a heart attack as well. So what we're seeing as a healthcare crisis today, what I see is underneath that is a diet and a relationship crisis, and that we're not experiencing enough love in our lives, and we're not getting healthy food so that that love can heal our bodies.
See, that's what I feel is empowering too, is there are the two things. There are the tools that you can use for communication, and then again, the tools that you're talking about. And John, you list like 15 different things that you feel like are affecting people a lot. Starting, the first one on your list was acetaminophen, MSG, sugar, sedentary lifestyle, stress. Can you talk about some of those?
Yeah, because some of them you might assume you already know, but most people are not aware of. And I put at the top of the list is acetaminophen,
right,
which is in hundreds of over-the-counter products. The most commonly known product is Tylenol, but you'll see acetaminophen tucked in everywhere when it comes to fever reducers, when it comes to painkillers, when it comes to allergy medicines, and so forth. And this is a known fact that acetaminophen suppresses the liver's ability to make a substance called glutathione. Now, I know a lot of people haven't heard yet the term glutathione. There's 100,000 studies on glutathione, and it's directly related to Alzheimer's, Parkinson's. Every child with ADHD-type symptoms will have inhibited glutathione production. Now, what does glutathione do? Glutathione allows your proteins to convert into dopamine and serotonin. Without glutathione, you can't make enough of these very important brain chemicals to feel happy, to feel centered, to feel motivated, and to upregulate the dopamine receptor sites. You have to have glutathione. So one is glutathione. Two, what glutathione does is it helps detoxify the brain of what's called heavy metals. So when you live near a freeway, for example, or you're driving on the freeway and your window's open, or you're jogging on a street where cars are driving by, just all those three things, what you're doing is breathing in lead, which comes from the car exhaust, or from the tires now. They now have lead-free gas. but you're breathing in lead, you're breathing in mercury, you're breathing in cadmium. Now these heavy metals, they get into the brain, they catalyze oxidative stress in the brain. They cause injury to the brain, and the brain wants to get rid of them. How does the brain get rid of them? Glutathione. So your body needs to make glutathione. So a lot of these causes are things that suppress glutathione, and glutathione helps to detoxify. Glutathione helps to make the brain chemicals, and the third thing glutathione does is it protects the brain from the toxicity of pesticides, from the toxicity of heavy metals. It's the protective. It's the term we commonly know is antioxidants. So we want foods that have lots of antioxidant quality, and we're always talking about that's good for health. It's been proven to be good for health. But like blueberries are great to lower your risk of cancer. Doesn't mean it's going to protect you from cancer. It just lowers the risk a little bit, and that's magic. But having glutathione is 1,000 times more powerful. You don't ever get cancer if your glutathione levels are healthy, and that's shown. People have cancer, people have heart disease, people have liver disease. All these things are directly linked to this very important antioxidant that your body makes on its own. And without that, our aging is going to increase faster, the diseases increase. So let's look at some of the things that suppress glutathione production. Acetaminophen is one of those things, and that's in all of your over-the-counter drugs.
I know.
Other things. Over-the-counter, most of your, when you get acid stomach, most of the, I'm not going to mention brand names here, but if you take you look on them, you'll see they have aluminum in them. Many of the antiperspirants have aluminum in them. Aluminum is going to go into the brain and catalyze oxidative stress and deplete you of glutathione. And these are all well known. If you have Asperger's, Alzheimer's, if you have Alzheimer's, you have excess aluminum in the brain. If you have ADHD symptoms, you have excess mercury in the brain. We want to help the body to remove these things. I think when we're talking about acetaminophen, our first reason, what's most interesting is a study that's at PubMed, and on that study on PubMed, what they showed is that in America since 1980, the amount of autism spectrum disorder has just soared. I mean, it's literally gone from 1 out of 10,000 to 1 out of 50 children, and in California, where it's the highest of anywhere in the world, it's 1 out of 20 boys on the autistic spectrum disorder. So this is like, whoa, what's going on here? This is a huge, huge crisis and very controversial, and some people say it's the vaccinations, because they have the vaccinations, their child gets sick, and then they never come back. Now, what just happened is the missing ingredient here is if you look at another study that was done in Cuba, since 1980, they've also followed the same vaccination schedule, which is huge amount of vaccinations we're giving our kids now. They follow it religiously, the same vaccinations, but no increase in autism. So what's happening there? Well, in that country, they don't allow parents to use Tylenol in order to suppress the fever that for some children who have a compromised immune system will run a high fever, and parents freak out, and parents take this Tylenol. Many doctors will even say, they don't know this research, they'll say, go ahead and take the Tylenol now, and they won't feel pain when you give the shot. It's the worst thing to do at a time when your body produces a fever to fight off some toxic influence to suppress the fever. Now, this just happened with one of my granddaughters. You know, she's 2 years old. The fever went to 103, and my daughter's freaking out. I said, don't worry. There's no research ever showing that that can damage the child, and you don't need an antibiotic. There's no danger happening. This is your body producing a fever to increase the glutathione to heal the brain.
Right.
When we suppress the fever, we suppress our glutathione. Then it went to 1.43, and she's like, you sure it's okay? Absolutely sure it's okay. If you look at the research, there's no research ever showing that a fever caused injury to the brain. Now, sometimes children have these little fever, these little seizures, and parents immediately go, oh my God, a seizure. No, this has shown children develop through that. You just hold them and protect them at a time of seizure. You comfort them, and after 3 days, the fever went down. She had plenty of water. It'd get the water into her. She had it was a bladder infection that triggered the whole thing, an E. coli. and D-mannose. D-mannose is a simple natural supplement you buy at the health food store, and it will take
Right.
it will take the E. coli out of the body. The body is doing its natural thing. And now, if a child has a fever over 105, then possibly antibiotics would be a solution, and you go talk to your doctor at that point. But the way most parents are told, as soon as your child has a 101 fever, 100 fever, call your doctor as if there's some alarm bell going off. Nonsense. So there's so much to learn about, dispelling these myths that have developed. One of the interesting things now they're coming out with, saturated fat is actually good for your heart. They're finally coming back to realizing that saturated fat, which is rich in cholesterol is the precursor to making testosterone and estrogen and progesterone and DHEA. You have to have that. Saturated fat is great for you. Now, coconut oil is the best saturated fat. Animal fat is perfectly fine as long as they haven't used antibiotics in the animal. So if we skip ahead to some of these causes, antibiotics is one of the #1 causes of all of these problems.
Antibiotics, pesticides, GMO, there's so many different causes to it. And thank you for doing the research on this, John, because I know everybody is probably feeling overwhelmed out there, but if you take a look at the book, the way that you outline it, it has all these different, you really are very detailed. So I can tell you've been really digging into this for the last 12 years. And were you really overwhelmed when you first got your diagnosis and then realized that you had ADHD?
Well, I got my diagnosis for Parkinson's. That was very scary.
Right.
My aunt had Parkinson's, my wife's aunt. We took care of her on her way to die. And you just saw the medications not working after a while, and it wasn't very, very, very nice. And I already knew the whole thing, and my doctor said, oh, we have medications for this. And no, the medication had proven to take away symptoms while the condition gets worse. So it took me a while. It didn't take that long because I had access to a lot of famous authors on natural solutions, and I discovered what is now, they've done double-blind studies on it, Dr. Mintz, M-I-N-Z, and on my website I give this study where they can click on it and go to the study. They show the natural supplements where he uses it to reverse Parkinson's. Now that wasn't there 12 years ago. I came across this on my own, really studying what I heard from other people, and I realized that if you make the correlation between Parkinson's, which is shaking, right? Now the reason you shake is because dopamine controls the muscles. And so if you're using your mind intently, the dopamine is using up to focus your brain, and now you have no dopamine for your body control. So then I looked at drug addicts, and drug addicts, when they're going off of their drugs, they also have shaking, like an alcoholic, their hands tremble. So I saw the relationship between drug addiction, going off of a drug, and what Parkinson's symptoms are. So I went to a drug rehab center in Mexico where they were doing IV drips of proteins. And Dr. Hitt at the time, he's no longer alive, he was 90 years old then, he was doing IV drips of protein, amino acids, and I sat in a room with people who were addicted to heroin and cocaine and OxyContin and smoking. Everybody went off of their addictions with no side effects, which is considered impossible, except that they were tired. Because one of the symptoms of having to you can't be stimulated. You have to be kind of tired and restful while your receptor sites are coming back up. So everybody got a little tired and bored while we told our stories. And they all thought I was going off of some drug, and I said, no, it's they told me, oh, you're in denial. So I guess I was addicted to stimulation. I was busy working all the time, traveling everywhere, writing books. I must have wrote 10 books in about 6 years. That's a lot of working. I was having a good time doing that, but it just really caused my receptor sites to downregulate. Mm-hmm. Getting those amino acid proteins is what brought my brain back into function. And it lasted about 3 months. My wife sent me back. She says, I want the husband I had before.
3 months ago.
And then that's what caused me to say, okay, I need to find natural solutions that I can take every day without having to get the IV drip of the substances. There's a great YouTube video of Dr. Perlmutter has a great book out right now. And it shows one of his clients with Parkinson's hobbling down the hallway, not able to speak. And then you give them an injection, an IV drip of glutathione, and now he's walking and he's talking and so forth. The problem there is you can't just keep taking the glutathione. He has to go back and get the drip again and again. You want to be able to get these nutrients in your daily diet. Now, the reason we don't just get it from even having steak and potatoes, to a certain extent, is simply because the steak usually has hormones in it, antibiotics in it, so it has to be hormone-free. But even once you're getting your nutrient, the reason you got the problem in the first place is you're not digesting your proteins properly. And to digest properly doesn't mean just digestive enzymes, which I always recommend for any brain issue. You have to start with digestive enzymes before you eat. But the second thing is your gut. The gut is the intestines. Okay, so you got these intestines. They need to have the right bacteria to fully digest your proteins and make the proteins that your body needs to function. And that's what's missing with everybody who's done antibiotics, or your mother took antibiotics. What's happening is you're missing the full microbiome. Now, microbiome, more people are hearing that term. That is what is like they're calling the second brain. We make brain chemicals up here, but we also make brain chemicals in our gut. Dopamine, serotonin, and GABA. And if we don't have the right microbiome, you don't make them. And if you don't have the right microbiome, you can't make something called vitamin D binding protein. Now, if you can't make vitamin D binding protein, you get cancer. Everybody who has cancer, they're missing the probiotics in their gut to make vitamin D binding protein, so your vitamin D works. Now, all doctors are saying you need to take vitamin D, D3, by the way. But if you don't have the healthy gut, then the D3 can't do its job. And that's where you've got to restore the right probiotics. And it turns out there's 44 probiotics that you need to make the protein, vitamin D binding protein. So there's some research out there showing it's having great results for people with cancer, people who do chemotherapy, they don't get chemo brain, other people that just go the natural route. Within a few weeks, the tumors are shrinking. And it's a very controversial subject, but what I see is that we all could benefit from some great yogurt that has all 44 microbiomes. So when I started doing that was years later, what I noticed is that while the amino acid had healed this condition, I still depended so much on the amino acids every day. So I have a superfood shake, and I take a few mineral supplements and whatever, and occasionally some vitamin C, various supplements that I'll take, which are good, and I recommend them. What I'm seeing is I don't need to take as much of that stuff once I started getting the microbiome healthy, because when your digestion works, then you're going to pull that from the food, just like people have done for a million years when cancer was not such a big threat, or Parkinson's wasn't a big threat, dementia wasn't a big threat, ADHD wasn't so common. See, we should be able to get this from our food, but due to the destruction of the microbiome by antibiotics, by pesticides, which means non-organic foods, and now we got the biggest problem out there is the GMOs. GMOs, what it is that we don't even know what's happening with the actual GMO, how that's changing things, but we do know for sure that what they use GMOs for is so they can use a pesticide called Roundup, and now it's even a worse pesticide, and they have these things called glyphosates.
Yes.
And glyphosates go right into the gut. You put it in the plant, it's in the plant, you sprayed it, now it's going to go into your gut and destroy your ability to digest. I mean, let's wake up. How many people today are having children having problems with wheat? They can't digest wheat. Gluten intolerance is taking over. Why? Why did that suddenly happen? Well, what happened with wheat is not GMO, but after the wheat is grown, they spray it with this pesticide to kill the bugs on it so it can ship easier. We've been getting toxic wheat for the last 20 years. This is what's destroyed the gut of our children, particularly children, because that's when the gut is developing. And along with that is soy. Soy also has very high amounts of phytic acid, and unless it's fermented soy, the phytic acid. If you take beans, seeds, and nuts, birds will eat them, and they all have phytic acid, and then they have to poop the beans, seeds, and nuts out, so that's how the seeds travel, is through the birds. So, but the one substance, we can handle some phytic acid, no problem. Actually, we need a little bit, but soy has high amounts of phytic acid, and for a child's tummy, which is developing, it's going to cause stomach aches. I mean, what a parent needs to know is if your child says, I have a little upset stomach, it's a big deal. Something is happening over the long term and needs to be corrected. So there's certain foods that you have to avoid, and certainly over-the-counter drugs to avoid, certainly minimizing sugar. Now, what sugar does, that's one of the conditions, and people give me heat for saying sugar causes ADHD, but it's so obvious. It's so obvious. And that what they've complained to me about, and they said, no, once you have ADHD, then you crave sugar. And I go, yeah, that's true. Like, I'm an alcoholic. I crave alcohol. But what made me the alcoholic was I drank too much alcohol. It produced huge amounts of dopamine that downregulates dopamine receptor sites. So now nothing makes me happy unless I have alcohol. It's a cycle.
Vicious.
And not that any one of these conditions is the only cause. You just put it into a mix. We all have some of it. And what we can do, and why it's important to know these causes, is over here, the rest of the book, I say right here are some natural solutions that can help. And it's often within days, symptoms will disappear. And they're over here. But let's say you had a headache and I had a pill to take away headaches. If you keep hitting yourself in the head with a hammer, the pill's not going to work. You know, I've seen.
That's a great analogy, by the way. You just make it that simple. Yes.
You've got to do two things. Sometimes people, you know, one of my favorite minerals that will, for most people, will immediately stop the looping brain. You know how your brain can have a problem and it just loops on it, loops on it, loops on it. This is such a common phenomenon that builds up our stress inside. The mineral is lithium. But not the high doses that doctors give, just a low dose of lithium that's just a mineral like any other mineral, bonded to orotic acid, which is a substance that's in mother's milk and cow's milk. Lithium orotate, your brain stops looping. Now, doesn't mean for everybody it's going to happen immediately because they just had a hot fudge sundae. You've got to have a decent life where you're not overstimulating yourself. Then these minerals can have immediate results. It always helps to some extent. But there's always other factors. We're very complicated, which is why there's 15 of these factors that are going on. But, you know, when people say genetics does it, yes, genetics is the gun, but it's these other things that pull the trigger. You know, when one of my nieces had that operation done. Now, this is one that I have, you know, in another state, and they have a whole different health philosophy. But she had her breast taken away just because she had that gene that can cause breast cancer. There's so many women that have that gene that don't get breast cancer. It's like that's the potential. If your body becomes unhealthy, then you click into that gene. In my family, we have the gene of often brilliance and genius has a high risk of schizophrenia or dementia and Alzheimer's. It's just if your brain is more active, we'll put it that way, with more connective tissue, you're going to produce more free radicals when you think. This is just fact. You make free radicals when you think. So if you're a big thinker, you're making massive amounts of free radicals. And if you don't have glutathione to protect yourself, then schizophrenia or bipolar or depression or, you know, these different symptoms are more common. The highest percent of people with schizophrenia are graduates of Harvard University and Stanford University. It goes along with genius. If you look at the great geniuses in the past, they were always addicted to drugs, almost all cases. And they also committed suicide. So somebody could think, well, let me give my child drugs and they'll be brilliant. And if I don't give them drugs, they won't know. If you don't give them drugs, but you give them nutrition, their brilliance can shine like it would have shined without all the side effects and the crash that's usually associated with having to take drugs for the stimulation they need.
And that's what I'm loving too. I think all of us, that what John's talking about, really empowering. This is what I love again about the book, is that you give all this information, and yes, it's overwhelming, but we're really getting educated. So it is getting educated about the different things that affect you. And John, I'm kind of thinking, of course I read the book, and I've always kind of suspected a little bit of, I call it squirrel.
I love squirrel.
I love squirrel. Squirrel.
It's a dopamine squirrel. Let's look over there.
That's what I posted. But I'm kind of thinking for everyone that's watching this or that reads the book, I mean, even just taking these supplements, because it just can't help with, even with outside, just again with pesticides and all these outside factors you can't necessarily control. Getting
Right.
that healthier brain has got to do that. I have a couple comments I just want to pull in here, and hopefully the audio is working well. The M word got brought up. Monsanto has major lawsuits in the past for Roundup. I'm sure you're.
Yes.
Have you seen the Monsanto commercials lately, by the way?
I don't watch that too much TV. And I can't hear you.
Yep, I think Mia froze on
Oh,
us.
Can't talk about Monsanto.
for you, because yeah, how about Monsanto did. John, let's talk about the probiotics and probiotics gift for the holidays DIY yogurt maker. Can you talk a little bit more about the yogurt?
Well, there's great probiotics you can buy, and it seems to be that the store-bought pasteurized yogurts are not going to be as effective as homemade yogurt. At my website, I do have videos on how you can make homemade yogurt, how you can get starters. There's even a yogurt called Bravo yogurt that has all 42 probiotics that are proven to create 120 milligrams with half a cup of the yogurt of this vitamin D binding protein. Also, proteins are made which will bind with the cannabinoid receptor sites in the brain, which also activate lithium in the brain to make oxytocin. It just improved digestion. Generally, in 3 weeks, your digestion will dramatically improve. Regularity of bowel movements happens, better sleep happens, increasing oxygenation of the system happens. These were the experiences that I had within a few weeks of making my own yogurt. Now I'm the official yogurt maker for all my kids, my grandkids, and my wife. It's a big deal to make it for everybody, but simple to make it for yourself.
And just to let you know, I'm jumping in on that. Talk to me about your store on your website too. We have a question out here from Mike Bays. What are the most important supplements for a child with ADHD? And I'd say an adult with ADHD. Can you tell me about some of the supplements that you offer? Because that's the great thing. You have a store for all of this too.
I do have a store for these things, and for every product I have a little video of explaining why this might be helpful. Some of the basics, we've been talking about the natural solutions here. I talked about Bravo yogurt. I think any child with ADHD could benefit by improving their digestion. Some immediate benefits for many children happen from the super minerals, which are minerals bonded to uric acid. It's just not normal minerals. These are minerals that are bonded to a natural substance from mother's milk that will go across the blood-brain barrier. It's called super minerals for men, but also you can use it for children half the dose. Vitamin C. Now, I just had somebody write in saying they were doing my vitamin C recommendations and they didn't notice any effect, but when they did the liposomal vitamin C, which is the equivalent of getting an IV drip, it's just a little bit more expensive, not much more, and it had profound effects right away. So sometimes the quality of the vitamin makes a big difference. A liposomal vitamin C, you can put in a little drink with water and kids can drink it. It's kind of like an orange juice. With pycnogenol or grapeseed extract. Now, pycnogenol, it's like grapeseed extract. Grapeseed extract's a little cheaper, and that has been proven to increase glutathione levels. Anything that can increase the glutathione levels is going to help, along with vitamin C. So vitamin C, there's also a simple multivitamin I recommend. There could be others, but this one has taurine in it, along with high doses of vitamin C and substances from fruits that are similar to grapeseed extract, and that's called Potential. Just using Potential. When I travel, the one thing I bring with me is Potential. I also generally have for breakfast is a superfood shake with undenatured whey protein. That means it's not heat processed, and this is really important. You can have regular whey. If it's been heat processed, it doesn't have the great effect, but undenatured whey protein increases glutathione levels 400%. So that's another really good one. So those are some of the basics. The book outlines 9 different supplements that research has proven to be effective for ADHD type symptoms for lowering your stress.
And you also toot the horn of the incredible edible egg, correct?
Oh, I talk all about eggs. Eggs are great. Egg yolk. Now, don't ever be afraid of too much cholesterol from egg yolks. Harvard has done 3 studies showing that that taking egg yolks does not increase your cholesterol levels, and actually egg yolks gives you the beneficial effect of cholesterol to make better hormones. So if your hormones are out of balance, eggs every day is a great solution to help.
And it's the source too. We're really talking about sources for things.
Free range is going to, and omega-3, free range and omega-3 makes a huge difference. If it's not free range, they've used antibiotics. That's what our food today. It's going to have all these antibiotics in the animal. That means it also comes into our body as just as strong. And antibiotics kill these very important probiotics that are necessary in our gut to make all kinds of what's called glycoproteins. You can never heal diabetes, for example, if you don't have healthy gut. once you have glycoproteins, they actually rebuild the cell walls. There's a substance there for the people with blood sugar issues called membrane support, which is the minerals necessary to rebuild the walls. But if you don't have the gut, you don't have the glycoproteins to do it. The gut is everything, it seems.
It really is it's the start of everything. Here's a quick question for you. Denver Prophet Jr. wants to know vitamin B complex with a small dosage of cinnamon, the happy mood stabilizer.
Well, vitamin D3 is great. I'm glad she's putting that in. The cinnamon would help to stabilize blood sugar a little bit, so that I could see why that could help people. But if somebody has compromised gut to the degree their gut is compromised, the vitamin D3 will not work, and that's why we need this vitamin D binding protein.
So it's and I'm kind of like the balanced everything.
Okay.
Here I am again. It's all about balance, it sounds like, John. So listen, let's talk real quick about your books. So right now we're in book 1. Talk about book 2 and book 3 and when those are coming out.
Well, they'll be coming out later this year. They're talking about once you get the ADHD, the hyperstimulation balance, now you can effortlessly, almost effortlessly, start giving up addictive habits. Addictive habits is what continues to be a symptom of ADHD. It's hard to change habits. You know, the beginning of the year comes, people make habits, make resolutions, and they can't keep them. That's usually because the ADHD symptoms keeps that from happening. So once you establish nutritional balance, then how to start making changes, identify what your addictions are, identify all of the behaviors that will lower stress in your life, also extra nutrition for lowering stress, like for women, the lithium orotate, the superminerals for women, the 5-HTP sometimes is extremely helpful to lower stress for women. And then they can more easily give up the addictions and establish new habit patterns. It's really hard to make a change when, as soon as you're feeling stressed, your brain wants to go to those things that will suppress the symptoms of stress, like junk food and sugar or overstimulation. And what we want to do is find the balance first, then learn to change our habits. And that's the second book. And the third book is once you start changing habits, now it's easy to follow a healthy regime. And so I go through my ideas, at least, on a healthy diet and dispelling all these myths. Today we covered one of the myths, that egg yolks are bad. We also know the myth that meat is bad. If you choose to eat meat, eat organic meat without hormones. It's actually good for your heart. You can also go vegan way. There's, you know, I talk about the different diets and get rid of the myths so that we can have a healthy diet that will sustain optimal brain function and gut function and heart function.
It's all looped in together. John, what would you like for us to do? Go to Mars, Venus? What are our next action steps?
Well, action steps is to go to, if you want to know more about this, go to marsvenus.com. Actually, go to Amazon and download the book is what I'd love you to do. But you can download it, it's $3. Or you can go to my website and you get a summary of the book. It doesn't have all the information. And then start learning about your brain and body by watching the videos. There's lots of free videos there for people to watch. And if I was starting with anything, I'd start with potential vitamins, vitamin C, grapeseed extract, those simple ones. I would certainly start making the yogurt at home because it all starts in our gut.
And yes, please go to their website. John, you have everything from stress to PMS. You have a video on every ailment I could ever think of.
Yeah, most people don't realize that that's there. I guess we don't highlight it. We have so much information about relationships and dating and communication. I mean, that's 30 years of my life. But at the store on the left, there's all these conditions that people are facing, and you click on them, you get a 10-minute video on often what went wrong in the body. Why did this happen? Get to the cause of it, and how can you start to address the cause? And that's always been my direction, is trying to find the cause of things and treat that so that we can be healthy as opposed to treating a disease.
Your curious mind is serving us well.
Thank you.
I even looked at the prostate one, and I don't even have one. Why not? They look so good. John, thank you so much. Let's go to Mars Venus. And I did download both your book and the ebook. It's all great information, and I definitely will sign up for more updates, especially when the next 2 books are coming out. So thanks for being with us today.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. And pop in here with more questions on the comments. Thank you so much. Bye.
cocaine, which is a stimulant, and one dose, your brain is rewired so that all you seek for happiness is suddenly another shot of cocaine. But that
Right.
same rewiring happens to a lesser degree if somebody watches a great TV show. Then your mind is always going like, you're feeling sort of restless, and you go to the TV like it's going to give that to you every time. Or maybe you get a good email, and it was good news. So now
Right.
for the rest of your life, you're always going to the email whenever you're feeling kind of restless and unsettled. And what we have to learn to do is not to be so addicted to these things in our outer world. And they're a sign that we're not experiencing groundedness and centeredness inside ourselves.
And I'll tell you, especially with this audience that's watching, we're all online people, John. So think about that. I mean, that's what our world is. A lot of these people, this is where we make our money, is from having all these different screens open. And again, when I first heard you talk about that at the summit and then started reading the book, I thought, oh, man, I mean, there really are a lot of combinations. And I want to read this real quick because this is what I picked up from a description. And this is what I'm loving about all the work you're doing. Learn how new communication skills and nutrition can immediately lower stress levels while providing the found down.
I couldn't hear that whole message, but got part of it.
It got part of it. It's basically that, you are combining communication skills with nutrition, so you're really helping people to sort of start from the inside out, because if we have too much input, it's going to be hard to stay focused.
Well, let's take an example of being stimulated with screens and online. And, for me, a lot of my work is, writing in front of a computer even. It's such an immediate gratification. Digital input, lights, colors, changes, fast changes. What these things do is they stimulate the part of the brain called nucleus accumbens, which is a dopamine part of the brain. And dopamine gives us...
Then I've been doing a lot of research in the last couple of days. Hyper anything, right, is just not a good thing.
Well, that's the whole story about this book, which is whatever our normal challenges are, when we're overstimulated in our life, it's like putting a magnifying glass on top of our temperament, on top of our challenges, on top of our conditioning. So let's say you are feeling a bit introverted. Then when you're hyper-stimulated in life, you become hyper-introverted. If you're a sensitive person, you become hypersensitive, which can cause mood swings, can cause happiness one day and being upset the next day. And it's like, where's the congruency? We tend to lose it. You can see this so clearly in children because they typically fall in the 4 categories. They could be defined in many different ways, but a simple way is some kids are more bold. They like to take risks. They're assertive. They often act without thinking sometimes. They're impulsive in their actions. Then you get kids who are more distracted. They're more they want to express themselves. They're creative types. They always like to start new things, but they don't have a good, their challenge is to finish those things. So they're always starting things and then procrastinating, putting it off. So if you are hyperstimulated, if your brain is hyperstimulated, then you never finish things. You're starting and starting and starting. Then there's another type of child or adult who's more responsible. They're the more compliant kids. They want to do everything right. But when they're hyperstimulated, like with video games, with the high carbohydrate diet, with rushing around, with and as they get to become teenagers with porn and so forth, these responsible types, they are really hard on themselves, and they have this perfectionist thing where I have to be perfect. And one of the challenges there is that quite often in their relationships, they demand perfection of their partner. It's kind of like, well, you should be this way, you should be that way. And people see them often as judgmental and critical, and they really go, but I'm not judgmental and critical. I'm just saying how things can be better. That's all I'm doing. It's just that their vision is this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is how we can make it better. So the 4th type is the more sensitive type, and they get their feelings hurt really easily because they're hyper-focused on what other people need. So let me be considerate of you. What would you like? Let me do this for you. And they're always like little antennas up going, what do other people need? How can I give them what they need? And when people don't think that way about them, it's like, doesn't anybody care about me? And they tend to be really challenged when it comes for asking for support because their whole thing is, I give and give and give. Why aren't people giving and giving to me? Now, even as we're talking about this, Mia, some people listening might go, "Well, I'm all of those things."
I was raising my hand. I'm like, that's me. That's me.
Probably like that. But, part of maturing is we integrate all aspects of who we are. As children, they'll tend to go through phases. One will be more dominant, another is more dominant. But hopefully we integrate all of these aspects of ourselves, which is we can be confident and bold, we can be sensitive to other people's feelings, we can be positive and uplifting and creative. How can I think outside the box here? And yet at the same time be grounded with that sense of responsibility and following through. That's a whole person. But what happens is we're having this overstimulation, which challenges us from integrating all these parts in a healthy way. When we see it in children, it's much more clear they're one way or another, and we want to medicate it, and we call it ADHD, or we call it ADD. And the same condition, as people get older in their 60s and 70s, it turns into dementia, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and that's what's going on in the world today. It's not just happening to our kids, it's happening to adults, and it's
I'm going to keep clapping for John Gray. He's on here. Thank you for joining us. I'm Mia Voss. You're just tuning in to the Mia Connect Power Chat. We have a very special day, time, and guest, so thank you for being here. We're usually on Fridays, but I got to get some time with John Gray, so I'll do whatever he wants just to talk with him. So welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure for me to be here, Mia.
Thank you. I'm going to make this noise for you, too.
Because you can.
Because I can. Don't you wish you had that every time you walked in somewhere? I feel like you have that anyway. People get so excited. So listen, Google, you need to behave today so that this hangout goes well, because we all want to hear what John has to say. So I may cut in and out, but he won't, and it's going to be great. But my tiara is working. Did you notice that, John?
I did notice the tiara.
I'm just trying to compete with that dapper hat you have going on. Well, listen, as some of you know, I went to the Success Summit in Boulder about 2 weeks ago. I ran into John. I kind of accosted you. I don't know if you remember that.
I don't remember being accosted, but I remember meeting you.
Okay, good. I feel good because I was a little worried that I just kind of came at you, and you were so gracious and spent a lot of time talking with me. We were dealing with through natural cures, which is fantastic. And then, of course, I started reading your book and wanted to bring you on. But let's talk about you. It's so great to see you, though.
Well, I'm really happy to spend this time with you. Promoting the new book, Staying Focused in a Hyper World, has definitely challenged me to stay focused. So many opportunities, but that's what life is about. We're being hyper stimulated with opportunities and problems to solve and challenges and clients and everybody. How do we stay focused on what's most important? That's the key to it.
Yes, and that's the thing that really jumped out at me of this.
At an older age, but then in middle age, it challenges our relationships tremendously. It's very hard to stay committed in a relationship. Our attention span is shorter. Our ability to empathize becomes less because we're hyper-stimulated. We tend to seek more stimulation to feel happiness. So we're jumping from one thing to another, and yet we don't experience a depth. And this is what's happening today. So staying focused in a hyper world means to come back to what is most important and how are we putting our energies into that. You know, I remember once taking a class back in the day when time management was new, and one of the things they pointed out was people tend to spend 80% of their time in business on the things that really don't matter that much, and 20% of their time on things that matter the most. And I think we can apply that right now to all things in our life, is that in our relationships, for example, you know, when people think about what's most important, it's love and connection and compassion and generosity. And these are the things that really bring true happiness and fulfillment in life, give us a sense of making a difference. And that's what's most important. And yet we spend our time doing all kinds of things. And when it comes down to practical things, like as a counselor, couples will say to me, you know, my husband's not turned on to me anymore, or we're not having intimate time anymore. And I say, why? The first question, and they, well, we're too busy. And I go, do you watch TV at night? Yeah. So the reality is that we think we're too busy, but really we're overwhelmed and we're exhausted, and we have to come back to some sense of balance. And so this book is not just the psychological aspect of it, but it's also the physiological side of it. Because you can talk and talk and talk about balancing your life, but what's happening is our brains have literally changed, and we want to change our brains back. And there's physiological changes that occur, and it's most researched if you look at something like cocaine. If you take